My parents forced me to drop out of college and work 3 exhausting minimum wage jobs, just to pay for my golden child sister to attend law school. My own father looked me straight in the eyes, calmly swirling a glass of imported wine, and told me I was nothing more than an investment, a cash source created to fund her brilliance. 5 years later, I was sitting in the very last row of a federal courtroom in downtown Chicago. I wore a plain navy sweater, no makeup, no designer anything. And I watched that same sister Lillian West stand confidently at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a flawless $3,000 ivory suit, preparing to deliver the opening statement of her very first multi-million-dollar corporate case. She opened her mouth, but before a single word came out, the judge interrupted. The entire courtroom froze. The most feared judge in the Northern District suddenly leaned forward, her voice cutting clean through the silence. "Miss West, would you like to join me in chambers?" And in that exact second, my sister stopped breathing. Her husband stopped moving. My parents forgot how to exist. "Miss West, would you like to join me in chambers?" Those were the exact words spoken by the Honorable Judge Cassandra Hale into the microphone of courtroom 417. And she wasn't looking at Lillian. She never even glanced at her. Lillian stood frozen at the front, her back straight, her polished hands gripping the edge of the mahogany podium. She had spent her entire life preparing for this exact moment. Perfect posture, perfect tone, perfect image. She had invited everyone, our parents, her husband, even distant relatives, to watch her prove she was everything they believed she was: the prodigy, the pride, the future. But Judge Hale didn't care. She looked past Lillian's perfectly curled hair, past the expensive legal team, past the invisible line separating power from the public. And she looked directly at me, Davina West, sitting alone in the back row, wearing a cheap sweater and silence. I wasn't a lawyer. According to my family, I was nothing. A dropout. A former waitress. A background character in my own life. A ghost they only remembered when they needed money, or someone to blame. The silence that followed wasn't normal. It wasn't just quiet. It was suffocating. The kind of silence that crushes your chest when reality suddenly shifts and no one understands why. My father was sitting 2 rows ahead of me. He had been leaning forward all morning, practically glowing with pride, smiling, relaxed, certain. But the moment he heard the judge say my name, he turned around so fast it looked unnatural. His face went blank. That confident smile, the one he wore like armor, collapsed into something fragile. Confusion, then fear. Next to him sat Lillian's husband, Adrian Cole, a rising star at one of Chicago's most elite corporate law firms. Sharp, expensive, arrogant. He had spent the last 3 years treating me like I existed somewhere beneath the floor, like I was a problem to be managed, or a joke to be tolerated. When the judge called my name, he dropped his pen. A heavy, gold-plated fountain pen. I heard it hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crack that echoed across the courtroom. At the front, Lillian looked like someone had just erased her reality. Her lips parted slightly. Her fingers tightened around the podium. Her knuckles turned white. She looked at the judge, then at me, then back at the judge again, trying desperately to understand why the most powerful person in that room had just stopped everything. For me, for the sister she had spent years calling a failure. I didn't react. I didn't smile. I didn't give them anything. No satisfaction, no emotion, nothing. I simply reached down, picked up my worn black portfolio, and stood up. Slowly, calmly. I walked down the center aisle, each step echoing louder than it should have. I passed my father, still frozen. I passed Adrian staring at me like I didn't belong in reality. I reached the wooden gate separating the public gallery from the courtroom floor, pushed it open, walked past my trembling sister, and followed the armed bailiff toward the judge's private chambers. Before I tell you everything, take a moment to subscribe, but only do it if you truly believe in family, in loyalty, and in standing by what's right. I'm also curious, where are you listening from right now? What's the weather like, where you are? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. This story contains some fictional elements and is enhanced with the support of AI, created to bring out deeper emotions and meaningful lessons. I hope you enjoy the journey, and that it stays with you long after it ends. Now, let's continue, but to understand why a multi-million-dollar trial came to a complete stop. Because of someone like me, you need to go back. Back to the exact moment I stopped being a daughter and became an account balance. 5 years earlier. I was 20 years old. I was halfway through my pre-law program at the University of Illinois. I had a perfect GPA. I lived in the library. I memorized case law until my head hurt and my eyes burned. I believed something simple. If I worked hard enough, if I stayed quiet, if I never caused trouble, one day, my parents would finally look at me the way they looked at Lillian, proud, certain that I mattered. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when everything ended. I walked into the bursar's office to finalize my registration for the fall semester. The clerk barely looked at me at first. She typed in my student ID, paused, and then frowned. That small pause was enough to make my stomach drop. She printed out a document and slid it under the glass. It was a notice from the bank. My tuition check had bounced. Not delayed, not pending. Rejected. The account had been closed. Just like that. No warning, no explanation, no backup. I remember standing there, staring at the paper, feeling like I had just been quietly erased. I took the train home in silence. The house in Oakbrook looked exactly the same as always. Perfect. Massive. Impressive. Green lawns trimmed to precision. A wraparound porch that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The kind of house that told the world everything inside it was stable and successful. I walked through the front door and immediately heard laughter. Loud, happy, celebratory. It was coming from the kitchen. I stepped inside, still holding the paper in my hand. The countertops were polished marble. Sunlight poured through the wide windows. Everything looked warm, expensive, untouchable. My father stood at the center island, opening a bottle of champagne. My mother leaned against the counter, scrolling through her tablet with a soft smile. And Lillian sat on a velvet stool, clapping her hands like a child who had just been handed the world. She had been accepted. An elite private law prep program in downtown Chicago. Exclusive, ridiculously expensive. A direct pipeline into top-tier law schools. The kind of program most people couldn't even dream of affording. I walked forward slowly and placed the printed notice on the marble counter. The paper barely made a sound, but it was enough. The laughter stopped. My father looked down at it, then up at me. There was no surprise in his eyes. No concern, no urgency. Just calculation. He poured champagne into 3 crystal glasses. One for himself. One for my mother. One for Lillian. He didn't pour one for me. We restructured the education fund. Davina, my mother said casually, not even lifting her eyes from her screen. Her voice was light, indifferent, like she was explaining a minor household decision. Lillian's program requires full focus. She needs to live downtown, close to campus. Secure building, no distractions, no part-time jobs, no loans. She finally looked up, smiling faintly. Her potential needs to be protected. I felt something inside me collapse. Not loudly, not dramatically, just gone. I asked them how I was supposed to finish my degree. I reminded them I was already 2 years in. I reminded them I was at the top of my class. I reminded them they had promised me this since I was a child. All I needed was tuition. Just the basics. My father picked up his glass. He took a slow sip, deliberate, controlled, letting the silence stretch until it pressed against my chest. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, flat, completely empty of warmth. You're going to get a job. Davina. He looked at me the way someone looks at numbers on a spreadsheet. Not a daughter, not even a person. An asset, if you have to. You'll get 3. He set the glass down gently. You're the one who funds this family now. His eyes didn't soften, not even for a second. Lillian is the investment. She has the pedigree, the presence, the future. He leaned back slightly, completely certain of his logic. We have limited resources. We back the one who wins. He paused, just long enough for it to sink in. Don't be selfish. He said it like it was simple. Then he told me to go upstairs and pack. My room was being turned into Lillian's study. I was 20 years old. I had done everything right. I never caused trouble. Never asked for anything. I just studied and stayed quiet. And in one afternoon, I lost everything. My education, my home, my future. I didn't cry. I turned and went upstairs. I packed 2 small suitcases, just clothes and a few notebooks. When I came down, they were still celebrating. No one looked at me. No one said anything. I walked out. That night, I moved into a small, cold studio. The next morning, I started working. By the end of the week, I had 3 jobs: diner in the morning, legal deliveries in the afternoon, data entry at night. I barely slept. And every dollar I made was no longer mine. I didn't scream or throw anything. I had learned very early that showing anger or pain in that house only gave them more power. It gave them proof that I was unstable, emotional, weak. So I said nothing. I turned around, walked up the stairs, and went into the bedroom that was no longer mine. I packed everything I owned into 2 cheap canvas suitcases. Clothes, books, notes. Nothing more. I carried them downstairs and walked out of the house before they even finished their first glass of champagne. That same night, I moved into a tiny, drafty studio on the edge of Chicago. The old radiator rattled all night long. The single window faced a stained brick wall just a few feet away. The wooden floor was cracked and peeling at the corners. It was a violent contrast to the polished marble and quiet luxury I had grown up with. The next morning, I started looking for work, anything I could find. I took a morning shift at a busy, greasy diner. By the time I got home, I smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. In the afternoons, I worked as a legal courier, delivering subpoenas across the city. Doors slammed in my face. People shouted. Some refused to open at all. At night, I worked in a windowless office doing raw data entry for a large corporate law firm downtown. I slept maybe 4 hours a night if I was lucky. My hands were always dry and rough. My feet were constantly swollen, and my bank account never stayed full because my parents never stopped calling, every month, without fail. They demanded money for Lillian. They called it my responsibility. They said it was my duty to support the only one in the family who was actually going somewhere. So I sent the money. Every time, I became invisible, a ghost moving through my own life, serving coffee to strangers who never looked at me, typing endless numbers into spreadsheets that never seemed to end. While my sisters spent the money I earned on designer bags and luxury experiences, they thought they had broken me. They thought I would stay there forever. At the bottom, quiet, obedient. But they had no idea what I was doing during those long, silent night shifts. They had no idea that while I was typing their data, I was reading everything, every contract, every email, every hidden line. I was learning how their world actually worked. They didn't realize it. But forcing me into that job was the most expensive mistake they would ever make. For 2 years, my life followed the same pattern. Wake up before sunrise, work until exhaustion, send money, repeat. Every morning at 4. I put on my stiff diner uniform and served greasy food to people who barely acknowledged I existed. By noon, I was on the subway with a leather bag full of legal documents, tracking down people who didn't want to be found, standing in the cold, waiting outside buildings, getting cursed at when I handed over court papers. It hardened me. It taught me how to read people, how to see through lies, how to stay completely still when someone tried to break me. And every single week, my phone rang. Not once did they ask if I was okay. Not once did they ask if I had eaten. It was always about money. Lillian needed $2,000 for a prep course, then $1,500 for a summer rental with her classmates, because networking mattered, because her future mattered, more than mine ever did. I sent the money every time. No arguments, no questions. I worked my shifts, counted my tips, and transferred whatever they asked for, quietly, carefully, keeping track of every dollar they took from me. The reality of my place in that family became clear during a Sunday dinner. I had just finished a double shift at the diner. I was exhausted. My feet hurt. My clothes still smelled like grease and soap. When I walked into the dining room, I saw someone new sitting beside Lillian. His name was Adrian Cole, a junior partner at one of the top corporate law firms in Chicago. Sharp, polished, confident. The kind of man who had never been told no. His suit was tailored, his watch expensive, his posture effortless. When I stepped inside in my worn jeans and cheap sweater, he looked at me slowly, from head to toe, like I didn't belong in the room. He leaned back, swirling his wine, and gave a small, amused smile. "So this is the sister who works around the city," he said. His tone was calm, but it carried something sharper underneath. Lillian laughed quickly, eager, trying to match him. She started explaining my jobs, the diner, the deliveries, leaving out one detail, that I was paying for everything she had. Later that night, after dinner, my mother pulled me aside in the hallway. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't lower her voice. She just reminded me that Lillian needed money for textbooks. I reached into my bag, took out my checkbook, and wrote the amount. $2,500. I handed it to her. No hesitation. At that moment, Adrian stepped out of the dining room. He looked at the check in my mother's hand, then at me, and smiled. "You should really think about appearances," he said, adjusting his tie. "It wouldn't look great if people found out a future attorney is being supported by someone working minimum wage jobs." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Everyone heard it. My parents laughed. My father even nodded, like it was a clever observation. That was the moment something inside me finally broke. Not anger, not pain. Something quieter. Final. They didn't just take from me. They enjoyed it. They needed me to stay small, to make their version of the world make sense. I didn't respond. I put on my coat and walked out. They stayed inside, laughing, certain, untouchable. That night, I went to my shift at the law firm. The building was silent, cold. From midnight to morning, It felt like a different world. Just security guards, cleaning staff, and people like me, the ones no one noticed. We worked in the basement. No windows. Just rows of computers, stacks of files, and the constant hum of servers. Most people typed without thinking. Just numbers. Just data. But I didn't. I read everything. Every contract. Every email. Every detail they assumed no one would notice. And slowly, I started to understand how their world really worked. From midnight until 8 in the morning. The glass tower in downtown Chicago felt like a completely different world, almost abandoned except for a few armed security guards, the quiet cleaning crew moving through the halls, and a small group of data clerks like me working in silence deep below ground. We were assigned to a windowless basement filled with humming servers and stacks of cardboard boxes that seemed to reach the ceiling, each one packed with documents that no one else wanted to read. The work was repetitive and exhausting. We scanned, sorted, and entered thousands of pages into the firm's system. Most of the clerks didn't pay attention to what they were typing. They kept their headphones on, eyes fixed on the screen, just trying to get through the night. But I read everything. Every contract, every internal email, every financial record hidden inside those files. Over time, I started seeing patterns. I began to understand how cases were built, how information was layered, how truth could be hidden inside volume. The lawyers upstairs didn't read raw data. They relied on summaries. And because of that, they missed things, important things. At that time, we were processing documents for a major corporate fraud case. The lead prosecutor was Cassandra Hale. She had a reputation across the entire city. Sharp, relentless, unforgiving. She didn't lose. It was early Tuesday morning. The room was cold, silent. The only sound was the steady rhythm of my keyboard as I worked through another file. I was working through a massive set of financial spreadsheets submitted by the defense team. Thousands of rows of dense, repetitive numbers designed to overwhelm anyone reading them. The kind of files most people would rush through without thinking twice. But something felt off. A detail didn't align. I stopped typing and opened the file's advanced properties, digging into the metadata hidden beneath the surface. Metadata is the digital footprint every file carries, a record of when it was created, who accessed it, and exactly when it was last changed. The defense claimed the contract had been finalized 3 years earlier, long before the dispute began. But the metadata told a different story. The specific cell containing the contract date had been modified just 2 weeks ago. It was clear. The document had been altered. It was a small detail, buried deep inside a massive file, something every associate upstairs had missed. I didn't report it to my supervisor. I already knew what would happen. They would take it, claim it, and erase me from it. So I printed the server log, wrote a short note, checked the timestamp in cell D4 against the system record. Then I took the elevator upstairs. The executive floor was quiet. I placed the paper on Cassandra Hale's desk and left. The next night, I returned from my shift, swiped my badge, opened the basement door, and stopped. She was sitting there, in my chair, holding the note, watching the entrance. When she saw me, she stood up slowly. She didn't ask where I studied, didn't ask for my background. She looked straight at me and asked, calmly, "How did you find this?" I didn't hesitate. I didn't look away. I walked over to the desk, turned on the monitor, and pulled up the file. Then I explained, calmly, step by step. I showed her how the system stored layered data, how the visible document had been cleaned, edited, polished, and how the defense team had overlooked one thing: the server history, the part no one sees unless they know where to look. I pointed to the timestamp, the discrepancy. the hidden trail they couldn't erase. Cassandra Hale didn't interrupt. She didn't move. She just stood there, listening in complete silence. When I finished, the room felt heavier. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above us. She looked at me for a long moment, studying me. "You are wasting your life down here," she said finally. Her voice was sharp, certain. "The associates upstairs read case law all day, but they don't understand what they're looking at." She stepped closer to the screen. "They don't see how lies are built." Then she looked back at me. "I need someone who does." That night changed everything. She didn't ask for my resume. She didn't care about my degree. She cared about what I could see. After that, she started bringing me in quietly, not to argue cases, not to stand in court, to learn something else, something more valuable. She showed me how the system really worked, how cases were won before they ever reached a courtroom, how to follow money across accounts no one was supposed to find, how to recover communications people thought were gone forever, how to turn data into leverage, into pressure, into control. I learned quickly, faster than I expected, and I understood something. This world wasn't about who spoke the loudest, or who wore the most expensive suit. It was about control. Control of information, control of truth, control of what could be proven. And while I was down there learning all of that, Lillian was spending everything I earned. Learning how to perform, how to sound confident, how to win attention in a room. She was learning how to look powerful. I was learning how to end cases before they even began. I was learning how to end a case before it ever reached a courtroom. And in that cold basement, I made a decision. I wasn't going back to college. I wasn't going back to classrooms, lectures, or theories that didn't match the real world I was already inside. I chose a different path. Quiet, invisible. I took every dollar I had left and invested it into specialized digital forensic certifications. No shortcuts, no guidance. Just long nights in my freezing apartment, teaching myself how systems worked, how data moved, how it could be hidden, and how it could be found again. I learned advanced extraction methods, encrypted server structures, metadata analysis at a level most people never even heard of. Cassandra Hale didn't advertise what I could do. She introduced me carefully to the right people. A small circle of elite litigators who didn't care about degrees. They cared about results. They needed someone who could find what others missed, someone who could uncover the truth buried inside layers of data. By the time I turned 24, I had built something of my own, quietly. Davina West Consulting. I wasn't a lawyer. I didn't stand in court. I worked behind it. I became the person they called when they needed proof. Real proof. The kind that couldn't be argued away. I charged $500 an hour, and within months, my schedule was full. Firms across the country reached out, case after case, problem after problem, and I solved them. But my family knew nothing. I kept it that way. I stayed in the same apartment, drove the same old car, worked occasional diner shifts on weekends just to maintain the illusion. I understood how they thought. If they knew the truth, they wouldn't change. They would take, demand, control. So I stayed invisible. Let them believe I was still the failure they had defined, the ghost they created. The first time I said no came 3 months before Lillian's wedding. It was a normal Tuesday, at least. It started that way. I chose to stay silent about my success and let them keep believing I was nothing. If you were in my position, would you have done the same? Would you hide your success just to protect yourself from a toxic family? If you agree with my decision, leave a 1 in the comments. I was sitting behind the heavy wooden desk in my private office in downtown Chicago, reviewing a confidential agreement for a new client, the kind of contract that required precision, patience, and absolute focus. The city stretched out beneath the glass windows behind me, quiet and controlled. Nothing like the chaos I had once lived in. Everything in that room was deliberate, earned, and mine. My phone vibrated. The sound cut through the silence. I glanced down, already knowing who it would be before I even saw the name. My mother. Flashing across the screen. For a moment. I considered ignoring it, letting it ring, letting it fade into voicemail like every other call I had learned not to answer. But I picked it up anyway. I answered. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was doing, or where I had been, or whether I was even alive. She went straight into it. The wedding, flowers, decorations, logistics, expenses. Her voice was fast, urgent, almost frantic, like she was listing problems that needed to be solved immediately. The budget had gone over. She said, not slightly, not manageable. Over. She needed $15,000. Right now. No hesitation, no space for discussion. She explained that Adrian's family expected a certain level of presentation, that the venue had to look flawless, that the arrangements needed to reflect status, success, refinement. She said it like it was obvious, like it was my responsibility, like it had always been my responsibility. She talked about imported white roses, about custom centerpieces, about how everything had to look perfect under the lighting, how nothing could appear cheap or careless in front of people who mattered, people who judged, people who remembered. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Let her keep talking. Let her fill the silence. My eyes drifted back to my screen, to the numbers sitting there quietly, my account balance. More than I had ever imagined having when I was standing in that diner. Counting tips. Calculating what I could afford to send them at the end of each week. More than enough to solve her problem. More than enough to fix everything she was worried about. I took a slow breath, and I said one word. No. The silence on the other end was immediate, complete, like the world had just stopped turning for her, for a few seconds. There was nothing. Then I heard her breathing, sharp, measured, controlled, but only just. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice had changed. The softness was gone, replaced by something colder, more familiar. "You owe your sister this." She didn't pause, didn't reconsider. "You dropped out. You ruined your future." She didn't. Her words came faster now. Harder. "You should be supporting the one who actually succeeded." I didn't react, didn't interrupt, didn't try to defend myself. I had done that before, years ago. It never changed anything, so I spoke the way I spoke to clients. Calm, neutral, final. "My account is no longer available for your requests," I said. "You and Dad can handle the wedding expenses yourselves." There was a pause. Short, sharp. And then I ended the call. I didn't wait for a response. Didn't give her time to argue. Didn't give her the satisfaction of thinking she still had access to me. An hour later. My phone lit up again. A message this time. From my father. Short, direct. "You are selfish. A complete disappointment. Don't come to the wedding if you can't support your sister." I read it once, then again. No surprise. No anger. Just confirmation. I went anyway. Not to celebrate. Not to support. To observe. I wanted to see them clearly, without the version of me they had built, without the money they had always expected. The wedding was held at one of the most expensive hotels in Chicago, the kind of place designed to impress before you even walked through the doors. Everything about it was excessive, carefully curated, perfect. I didn't buy anything new. I wore a simple black dress I had bought years ago. Plain, unremarkable, invisible. When I stepped into the ballroom, the scent of white roses hit me immediately, heavy, almost suffocating. Thousands of them, imported, arranged in perfect symmetry. Crystal chandeliers reflected light across polished floors. Music drifted through the room, soft and controlled. Waiters moved quietly between guests, carrying trays of champagne, laughter, conversation, everything exactly as they wanted it. I walked toward the seating chart near the entrance, a large, elegant display of names and tables. I found mine and read it carefully. I wasn't at the main table, not with my parents, not with Lillian, not with Adrian's family. I wasn't even placed with extended relatives or distant acquaintances. My name was assigned to table 14. I walked across the room to find it. It was hidden, deliberately, behind a large structural column, near the kitchen doors, where the noise was louder, where the movement never stopped. A table for vendors, for staff, not for guests. Exactly where they thought I belonged. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel anything at all. My parents had placed me exactly where they believed I belonged, not by accident, not due to lack of space, but with careful intention and quiet precision that said more than any words they could have spoken out loud. At a table tucked away behind a marble pillar, I found myself seated beside the exhausted backup wedding photographer and a teenage coat check girl who kept checking her phone under the table. Both of them clearly there to work, not to celebrate. It wasn't random. It wasn't careless. It was deliberate. A quiet, public reminder of my place in their world. A place beneath notice. A place meant to keep me unseen. I pulled out my chair without hesitation, sat down calmly, and when a waiter passed by, I asked for a glass of tap water. Nothing more. No wine, no champagne, no performance. Just water. The kind of choice that made me invisible in a room built entirely on excess. As the 5-course dinner progressed, each dish more elaborate than the last, each plate presented like a piece of art designed to impress rather than nourish, Adrian finally stood up from the main table and took the microphone. The shift in the room was immediate, subtle, but powerful. Conversation stopped. Forks paused mid-air. All attention moved toward him. He looked exactly the way he always did. Flawless, composed. Every detail of his tailored tuxedo sharp and intentional. Every movement controlled. Every expression measured for maximum effect. He stood there like he belonged at the center of everything. And in that moment, he did. The room fell completely silent as he began to speak. His voice was steady, confident, practiced. He spoke about Lillian, her intelligence, her discipline, her achievements. He described her as if she were something rare, something exceptional, something worthy of admiration. He told the room she would be joining his firm as an associate, his tone carrying pride not just for her, but for himself, for the decision, for the image they created together. The guests responded exactly as expected. Applause, warm, loud, approving. The kind of reaction that feeds people like him. Then he paused. Just long enough to draw attention. Just long enough to create anticipation. He lowered the microphone slightly, and then he looked across the room, past the polished tables, past the well-dressed guests, past everything designed to distract, directly toward me, even from the shadow of the pillar. I felt it, the focus, the intention. A small smile formed on his face, not warm, not kind, calculated, sharp, deliberate. She earned all of this through talent and discipline. he said smoothly. Then, without breaking his rhythm, without raising his voice, he added, unlike some people who choose easier paths and settle for less, the words landed exactly where he wanted them to. Not loud, but clear. My father nodded immediately, proud, visible, as if he had been waiting for that exact moment. Lillian laughed softly beside him, a light, practiced sound, the kind that signaled agreement without needing to say anything at all. I remained still, hidden in the shadow, drinking water, invisible, untouched by the performance unfolding just a few meters away. Then my phone vibrated, a small, quiet interruption. I reached into my bag slowly and checked the screen beneath the table, careful not to draw attention, careful not to shift the image they had built of me. It was an email, encrypted, marked urgent, from the executive board of a global technology corporation based in California. Short, direct, confidential. They had officially retained my firm, Davina West Consulting, lead digital discovery for a $50 million corporate espionage case. The retainer had already been transferred. I glanced at the number, then looked again. It was more than the entire cost of the wedding happening around me, combined. Every flower, every light, every detail designed to impress, reduced to a number that barely registered in my world anymore. I locked my phone, slipped it back into my bag. Then I looked up again, at Adrian, still standing under the lights, still speaking, still certain of his place. I allowed myself a small smile, barely noticeable, then took another slow sip of my water. They believed in appearances, in titles, in what could be seen and applauded. They believed power came from being at the center of attention, from being acknowledged, validated, admired. But everything they had built rested on something fragile, something invisible, something they didn't understand. A lie. And I understood lies better than they ever could. I understood how they were built, how they were hidden, and most importantly, how they could be dismantled, completely. 2 weeks before the courtroom, I was 27. My company had grown in silence, not through announcements, not through recognition, but through results. From a single laptop in a cold apartment where I counted every dollar, to an entire secured floor in a corporate tower downtown. Glass walls, private access, systems no one outside could touch. No noise, no attention, no need to prove anything. Just leverage. The kind that doesn't need to be seen to be powerful. The kind that changes outcomes before anyone even realizes a game is being played. And as I sat there, behind that pillar, exactly where they thought I belonged, I realized something with absolute clarity. They had never seen me. Not really. And because of that, they were completely unprepared for what was coming next. I owned everything. Not just in name, but in reality. The company, the clients, the outcomes, every decision, every strategy, every result flowed through me. I had built it piece by piece, quietly, without anyone watching, without anyone helping. And now I had a full team of highly specialized analysts working under me. People who understood the same hidden systems I did. People who knew how to see what others missed. My net worth had crossed into 8 figures without a single announcement, without a single celebration. It just happened. Slowly. Silently. I didn't need the old car anymore, but I kept it. Parked in a rented garage, maintained just enough to run, just enough to look like nothing had changed. I only used it for one place, my parents' house, because the illusion mattered. It protected everything I had built. As long as they believed I was still struggling, still stuck, still beneath them, They would never look closer. They would never ask questions. They would never try to take control. Their belief that I was nothing became the strongest protection I had. One Sunday, my mother sent me a message. Short, direct, demanding, dinner, mandatory. Lillian had something important to announce. I didn't hesitate. I drove out in the same old car, the engine making that familiar grinding sound when I turned. The same sound they had always associated with failure. When I arrived, I parked far from Adrian's new sports car, making sure it was visible, making sure the contrast remained intact. I walked up the driveway like I always had. The same path, the same house, the same version of me they expected to see. Inside, nothing had changed. The smell of expensive food filled the air. Heavy wine, polished surfaces, everything controlled, everything curated. The table was set with precision, silverware aligned perfectly, plates untouched. Waiting. Lillian sat at the head, relaxed, confident, like she had already stepped into the life they had always imagined for her. Adrian sat beside her, composed, observant, satisfied with everything in front of him. My father stood near the table, carving the meat with steady hands, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. Not forced, not restrained, genuine. Pride. She had finally arrived. Her first major case? A corporate dispute worth millions. Exactly the kind of case they had always talked about, always expected, always believed she would handle. I took my seat at the far end of the table, near the kitchen, out of sight, out of focus, exactly where they had always placed me. I poured water into my glass and said nothing. I didn't need to speak. I just listened. Lillian talked the entire time, confident, certain, like the outcome had already been decided. The opposing counsel is completely terrified of me, she said, lifting her fork slightly as she spoke, her tone casual but deliberate, making sure everyone heard. They're a small firm, nothing serious. I'm going to shut them down in discovery. Adrian nodded beside her, reinforcing every word. Her filings were flawless, he added, taking a slow sip of wine. She has instinct. She knows how to control a case. My father raised his glass, the moment building exactly as they wanted. To my daughter, he said, his voice warm with pride, the one who was always meant for this. Lillian smiled, absorbing it, holding on to it, letting it reinforce everything she believed about herself. Then she looked at me, and everything changed. The warmth disappeared, replaced by something sharper, more calculated. Davina, she said lightly, as if she were offering something generous. Since you embarrassed this family at my wedding, I'm giving you a chance to fix it. She paused just long enough. I need a new outfit for my trial. A white suit. $3,000. Her voice stayed calm, controlled. Like it wasn't a request. Like it was expected. Pick up more shifts and get it for me by next week. No hesitation. No doubt. I didn't react. Didn't argue. Didn't show anything. I simply picked up my glass, took a slow sip of water, and set it back down. Then I asked one question. Who's the opposing firm? She rolled her eyes immediately, annoyed by the interruption, annoyed that I had even spoken. They're called Harrison and Vance, she said dismissively. Not that it matters to you. For a moment, everything slowed. I kept my expression neutral, still, controlled. But inside, something shifted. Because I knew that firm, not small, not insignificant, and definitely not unprepared. They were one of the most aggressive corporate defense firms in the state. More importantly, they were my client, the case she was so confident about. the one she believed she would dominate. I had been working on it for weeks. I had seen everything, every document, every file, every hidden layer of evidence, and I knew something she didn't. Something no one at that table understood. Something that would not just weaken her case, but destroy it completely. I knew the truth. Not a suspicion, not a theory, a fact. Her client was lying. The real estate developer had fabricated an entire chain of internal emails, carefully constructing a narrative that made it look like the opposing company had breached the contract first, shifting the entire foundation of the case in his favor. The emails were clean, convincing, structured to withstand surface-level scrutiny, but they were still fake. Every detail had been engineered, and Lillian had taken them at face value. No hesitation, no verification. She had filed them directly into federal court as official evidence. Exhibit C, a centerpiece. The kind of submission meant to anchor a case. She wanted a fast win, a clean, decisive victory. Something she could present. Something that would prove, not just to Adrian, not just to the firm, but to everyone watching, that she belonged there, that she deserved everything she had been given. But she hadn't checked the data. She hadn't questioned the source. She hadn't brought in anyone who understood how to read beyond the surface. If she walked into that courtroom and presented those emails as legitimate evidence, she wouldn't just lose the case. She would be committing perjury. On record. In front of a federal judge. It wouldn't be a mistake. It would be a career-ending violation, sanctions, public humiliation, possibly disbarment. Everything she had worked for would collapse in a matter of minutes. I sat at the end of the table, watching her laugh with Adrian, her confidence unshaken, her certainty absolute, completely unaware of what was waiting for her just ahead. I had a choice. Stay silent. Let it happen. Let reality unfold exactly as it would. Or speak. Tell them the truth. Give them one chance. Just one. I made my decision. The next morning. At 7. I drove back to the house. The sky was pale, the air cold and sharp, cutting through everything, and for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing. No anger, no resentment, no hesitation, just clarity. I walked up the stone path and saw my father sitting on the porch, exactly where he always sat in the mornings, calm, comfortable, reading his paper like nothing in the world could disturb him. When he noticed me, his expression shifted instantly. Annoyance, immediate. "What are you doing here?" he said sharply. "I told you not to come back without the money." I stopped at the top of the steps, didn't move closer, didn't step into his space. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady, controlled. "You need to call Lillian, right now." He lowered the paper slowly, looked at me, first confused, then irritated. "What are you talking about?" "She needs to withdraw Exhibit C from her case," I said, immediately. He stared at me, for a moment. There was no reaction. Then he folded the paper and set it aside. The look on his face changed. Not concern, not curiosity, disdain. "Explain," he said. "She needs to check the email timestamps," I continued. "The files don't match the system records. The data was altered after the fact." I kept my tone even, clear, precise. Her client fabricated those emails. If she presents them in court, it becomes perjury. There was silence. 10 seconds. Heavy. Still. Then he laughed. Loud. Sharp. The sound cut through the quiet morning and echoed across the yard. He stood up and stepped toward me. "Are you serious right now?" he said, pointing at me like I had just said something absurd. "Do you even hear yourself?" His expression hardened. "You're a waitress," he said. You deliver paperwork for people who actually matter. You don't understand anything about corporate law. It's not law, I said quietly. It's data. The files are altered. The timestamps don't match. The defense already knows. I tried one last time. Just tell her to check the source files. He stepped closer. The distance between us disappeared. Anger replaced everything else. You're jealous, he snapped. That's all this is. His voice rose. Louder now. Sharper. You failed. She didn't. And now you're trying to drag her down with you. He pointed toward the driveway. Leave. Then. Colder. Don't come back unless you have the money. I didn't move at first. I stood there, looking at him, really looking, not at what he was saying, but at what he believed. And in that moment, I understood something completely. He needed me to be nothing. He needed me to stay in that position, because if I wasn't, if I was right, then everything he had built his identity around, everything he had justified, every decision he had made, would fall apart. I nodded once. No argument. No explanation. I turned and walked away, step by step down the path, got into the car, closed the door, and drove. I had said what needed to be said, clearly, directly, without distortion. They chose not to listen, and that choice came with consequences. The outcome was already decided. They just didn't know it yet. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in that courtroom. The door closed behind me with a soft, final click, and in that instant, the noise from the courtroom vanished completely, as if someone had cut the sound out of the world, the tension, the whispers. The shifting bodies in the gallery all disappeared, replaced by a stillness so complete it almost felt unreal. Inside, everything was quiet, controlled, measured. The air carried a faint scent of old leather-bound books and freshly brewed coffee, a strange combination that somehow felt both intimidating and grounding at the same time. It was a space built for decisions that changed lives, and every detail reflected that weight. Judge Cassandra Hale removed her robe with slow, deliberate movements and placed it carefully over the back of her chair. Without rushing, she walked to a side table, poured 2 cups of coffee, and handed one to me as if this were any ordinary conversation. But it wasn't. She didn't look at me the way my family did. There was no judgment in her eyes, no dismissal, no quiet calculation about what I was worth. She looked at me with respect. Professional, earned. You look well, Davina, she said calmly, taking a small sip from her cup. I held her gaze. You look dangerous, I replied quietly. For a brief moment, something almost like amusement crossed her face, subtle but real. Before she turned back to her desk and picked up a thick case file. Lillian's case. She tapped it lightly against the surface. The defense submitted your forensic report this morning, she said. Everything checks out. Her tone shifted as she continued. Colder, sharper. Your sister's client fabricated the emails. A pause. She filed them anyway. I said nothing. There was nothing to add. She didn't verify a single detail. Judge Hale continued. No audit, no independent review, no attempt to confirm the authenticity of the evidence she was presenting to a federal court. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She wanted a quick win. She said, I met her eyes. She wanted to impress. I replied. Judge Hale gave a small, understanding nod. Then her expression hardened. Decisive. She will be sanctioned. She said, I have no choice. There was no hesitation in her voice, no room for negotiation. She submitted false evidence into federal court. That is not an oversight. That is a violation. Her gaze sharpened further, and she will face the consequences. The words settled between us. Final. Unavoidable. Then she added, more quietly, I only called you in because I saw your last name on the docket. Then I saw you sitting in the gallery. And it became clear. She paused for a moment, as if considering something. I wanted to give you a professional courtesy before I go back out there. I looked at her. Really looked at her. The same woman who had found me in a basement years ago. The same woman who had recognized something no one else had ever bothered to see. Do what you have to do, I said calmly. I warned them. I placed the cup back on her desk. They chose not to listen. She nodded once. No sympathy, no judgment, just acknowledgement. That was enough. I turned and walked back toward the door. My steps steady, my thoughts clear. My role in everything already finished long before this moment. When I stepped back into the courtroom, the shift was immediate. The air felt heavier, thicker. Every conversation stopped as I walked down the aisle. Every pair of eyes following me in silence as I returned to my seat in the back row. My father was staring at me, angry, confused, like he couldn't understand why I had been called in at all. Adrian looked unsettled, his posture no longer as rigid, his confidence slipping just enough to be noticeable. And Lillian. She stood at the podium, gripping the edges tightly, trying to regain control of a moment that was already slipping away from her. The door behind the bench opened. Judge Hale stepped back into the courtroom. The transformation was immediate. The room rose to its feet. She took her seat with authority, lifted the gavel, and brought it down in one sharp, echoing strike that silenced everything. Be seated, she said. Firm, controlled, absolute. And then it began. Miss West, Judge Hale said, her voice cutting cleanly through the room. Before you begin your opening statement, I want you to review the defense's supplemental filing regarding your Exhibit C. Lillian froze. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, but it was enough. Her hands tightened around the podium as she shuffled through her notes. Her movements no longer confident, no longer precise. She looked down, then up, then back down again, searching. At the defense table, the lead attorney from Harrison and Vance stood up smoothly, adjusting his jacket with calm, practiced ease. Your Honor, he said clearly, his voice carrying across the courtroom. We have established that the emails submitted by the plaintiff were fabricated. He paused, just long enough for the statement to settle into every corner of the room. The metadata confirms that these documents were created weeks ago, not years. A ripple moved through the gallery, subtle, but undeniable. We move to dismiss the case, he continued, and request sanctions for the submission of false evidence. Lillian stepped forward, gripping the microphone tightly, her composure slipping. That's impossible, she said, her voice cracking despite her effort to control it. We verified everything with our client. The documents are real. You verified nothing. Judge Hale responded sharply. Her voice filled the room. Cold. Unyielding. The metadata clearly shows these files were created 21 days ago. She leaned forward slightly. Did you consult a forensic expert before submitting this evidence? Lillian said nothing. There was no answer she could give before the silence could settle. Adrian stood up from the gallery, breaking protocol without thinking. Your Honor, our firm stands by. Sit down, Judge Hale said. Immediate. Final. You are not part of this proceeding. The room went completely still. Adrian slowly lowered himself back into his seat, his face losing color, his confidence collapsing in real time. Judge Hale turned back to Lillian. Your failure to verify evidence is unacceptable, she said. Her tone sharpened further. You have submitted false documents into federal court. Lillian's hands trembled against the podium. This case is dismissed. Judge Hale continued. Sanctions will follow. The gavel came down. Once. And it was over. Just like that. Months of preparation, years of expectation, gone. In seconds. Outside the courtroom, everything unraveled. Lillian leaned against the wall, crying openly now, her carefully constructed image shattered beyond repair. Adrian paced the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and urgent as he tried to salvage what little he could. But there was nothing left to control, nothing left to fix. The damage had already been done. My parents looked older, not just tired, broken. When I stepped into the hallway, my father saw me immediately. He walked straight toward me, ignoring Lillian completely. "What did you say to her?" he shouted, pointing at me. "What did you do?" His voice was loud, uncontrolled. "You ruined this. You destroyed her case." Before he could continue, the courtroom doors opened. The lead attorney from Harrison and Vance stepped out. Composed. Calm. He walked past my father without even looking at him, then stopped in front of me, extended his hand. "Excellent work," he said clearly. "Your analysis saved our client over $30 million. The hallway went quiet. Completely. He continued speaking. "We've sent the final payment to your office." My father lowered his hand slowly, confused. Lillian stopped crying. Adrian didn't move. His phone slipped from his hand and hit the floor. He looked at me, like he was seeing me for the first time. "Your firm," he said quietly, and everything they believed collapsed. I looked at my father, then at Lillian, then at Adrian. "I was never your cash source," I said quietly. "I own the company." They didn't speak. "I handled digital forensics for the firms you wish you could work with." My voice stayed steady. "I warned you." No one answered. There was nothing left to say. I picked up my portfolio and walked away. Through the doors. Out into the cold air. The car was waiting. I got in and told the driver to take me back. I had work to do, and nothing tying me back anymore over the next months. Everything changed. Not because I did anything, because they did. Adrian's firm reacted first. The case had been public, the failure visible. They couldn't ignore it, and neither could anyone else. Adrian's firm acted immediately. The next morning, he was called into a closed meeting. No discussion, no second chances. They stripped him of his major accounts, told him directly that the failure in court had damaged the firm, that it was his responsibility. And it was unacceptable. He didn't argue. He didn't defend her. Within 2 days, he was gone. He packed his suits, left the apartment, filed for divorce before the week ended. He refused to support her, said her actions had cost him everything. Lillian was left alone, in a place she couldn't afford, with nothing stable left. Then came the next step, the ethics board. Judge Hale followed through. The report was submitted, detailed, unforgiving. Lillian was called in. A formal hearing, public. She tried to explain, blamed the client, blamed Adrian, even tried to shift the focus to me, but none of it mattered. The evidence was clear. The decision was final. Her license was revoked. And with it, everything she had built disappeared. Her education meant nothing now. All the money, all the sacrifice, gone. She had no license, no income, only debt. And a public failure no firm would forget. No one would hire her, not even for the simplest position. But the real collapse came next. My parents. I ran a full financial check, quietly, legally. What I found wasn't surprising. My father had taken out a second mortgage, a large one. He used it to pay for everything, her tuition, her programs, the wedding. He believed it would pay off, that she would succeed, that she would return it all. That belief was gone, with no income and no career. The payment stopped. The bank didn't wait. 4 months later, foreclosure began. The house was no longer theirs. The same house he once stood in and called me useless. Now it was being taken. I drove past one afternoon, just to see. A moving truck was in the driveway. Cheap. Unremarkable. My parents were carrying boxes themselves. No staff. No help. Just them. And everything they had built, being taken away. The kitchen was gone. The marble counters. The place where everything changed. It all belonged to the bank now. Lillian had been forced out of her apartment. She was back at the house. Angry. Trapped. With nothing left to protect her. My mother called me once. I was in my office when my phone lit up. I saw her name. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message. Long. Desperate. She didn't apologize. Not for what they did. Not for what they took. Not for how they treated me. She went straight to money. Said they were losing the house. That they needed help. 200,000, immediately. She said family supports each other, that it was my responsibility. I listened, quietly, then deleted it. I didn't call back. I didn't respond. And I didn't send anything. I blocked her number. Then my father's. And finally, Lillian's, cutting off every remaining line of contact without hesitation or second thought. And I formally instructed the armed security team in the lobby of my corporate building to deny them entry under any circumstance if they ever decided to show up uninvited and desperate. They had told me to build my life on my own, to survive without them, to stop expecting anything. And I did exactly that. Only I built something far beyond what they ever imagined. Something controlled, protected, and completely out of their reach. With barriers they could never break through. I am now 28 years old, and my firm has secured a federal contract to investigate large-scale corporate fraud across multiple states, while I live in a private penthouse overlooking the city, far removed from everything they once used to define me. I no longer work exhausting shifts, no longer chase approval, and no longer waste time trying to prove my worth to people who chose not to see it. I learned what truly matters. You don't win by arguing. You don't win by asking to be understood. You win by knowing the truth, building strength in silence, and letting reality expose everything in its own time. My parents placed everything they had on one outcome, convinced it would carry them forward. And they never once considered what would happen if they were wrong. They never realized they had chosen the wrong side, and by the time they understood it, there was nothing left for them to stand on. I want to leave you with a few truths I learned from surviving everything they tried to turn me into. First, being related by blood does not give anyone the right to break you. And walking away from people who harm you is not betrayal. It is survival. Second, silence can be stronger than any argument when you use it with purpose, because while others are busy proving themselves with noise, you are building something real with facts. Third, real power does not need attention to exist, and while my sister needed a stage to feel important, I built something far greater where no one could interfere. Fourth, you cannot save people who refuse to see the truth. And sometimes the only thing left to do is step aside and let reality teach them what you already tried to explain. Fifth, your value is not defined by a degree, a title, or someone else's approval. Because the moment you understand how the world actually works, you stop needing permission to succeed. If this story touched you in any way, you have the power to do something meaningful right now. A simple like or subscribe isn't just support for this channel. It helps this story reach someone who might be going through the same thing in silence. Your comment could be the words that give someone strength to walk away, to stand up, or to finally see their own worth. When you share this video, you're not just passing along content, you're helping someone change their life.